A steel drum bobs in the waves off the San Diego coastline, weighed down with cinder blocks that were supposed to keep it hidden forever on the ocean floor. Instead, it rises to the surface, and when a harbor patrol officer finally forces the lid open, what he finds inside will launch one of the most disturbing homicide investigations the region has seen in years. There is no ID, no wallet, nothing to say who this person was. Just a decomposing body and 60-plus stab wounds. 2 weeks before that barrel is found, a young woman named Alicia Villegas reports her little brother missing. The police tell her there isn't enough to go on. They tell her adults are allowed to disappear on their own terms. What they don't know yet is that Alicia is about to do their job for them, and that the answer to her brother's disappearance is floating in the bay, waiting to be identified. This is the story of Omar Medina, and the sister who refused to let the system write him off as just another adult who walked away from his life. Before we get further into this case, it's worth remembering how often this exact scenario plays out across the country. An adult goes quiet, family members panic, and law enforcement, bound by policy rather than instinct, tells worried relatives there's nothing they can legally do yet. Most of the time, that caution is reasonable. People do walk away from difficult situations, change their numbers, start over somewhere new. But every so often, that same caution buys a killer priceless time. Time to clean a crime scene, time to dispose of a body, time to build a story that sounds just plausible enough to survive a doorstep conversation with police. Omar's case sits squarely in that second category, and the only reason the truth ever came out is because one woman refused to accept the official answer. Omar was the youngest of 3 siblings, the baby of the family, and everyone who knew him describes him the same way: warm, easygoing, the kind of guy who made people feel comfortable around him. Alicia was more than an older sister to him. She was the one who helped raise him, the one who showed up for him again and again, and as adults the two of them stayed close, talking almost every single day. When Alicia had kids of her own, Omar became the uncle who showed up, who paid attention, who genuinely wanted to be part of their lives. Theirs wasn't a relationship that involved long stretches of silence. If a day went by without hearing from each other, one of them would reach out just to check in. That's what made September 30th, 2017 so unsettling from the very first hour. Omar and Alicia had plans that evening. Nothing unusual, just a normal night where they expected to see each other at their mother's house. But when Alicia got there, Omar was nowhere around. At first she assumed he was running late or caught up with friends, so she sent him a message and didn't think much of it when she saw it had been delivered and read. His phone was clearly on, which meant, in her mind, that he'd answer eventually. Hours passed. No response. She went to bed still hoping there was a simple explanation, telling herself that maybe his phone died, or maybe he lost track of time. That hope didn't survive the morning. Her mother called asking if she'd heard from him, and that question was enough to turn Alicia's mild concern into real fear. She called Omar's landlord, a man named Timothy Cook, who was renting Omar a room in a property not far from where Alicia lived. Cook told her he hadn't seen Omar since the night before, when Omar had apparently been drinking and seemed to be struggling emotionally. Something about that explanation didn't sit right with Alicia. It didn't match the brother she knew. So she did the only thing she felt she could do. She went to the police and reported him missing. That's when she ran straight into a wall. Because Omar was an adult with no documented medical condition, officers explained that there simply wasn't enough justification to open a formal investigation. Adults, she was told, have the right to disappear if they choose to. It's a policy built around real logic, protecting the right of grown adults to walk away from their lives without law enforcement chasing them down. But for Alicia, that policy felt like abandonment. She knew her brother. She knew he wouldn't vanish without a word, not to her, not to their mother, not without some kind of explanation. With no help coming from the department, Alicia became her own investigator. She called hospitals. She called jails. She reached out to every friend and family member who might know something, however small. She tried to get access to Omar's phone records, hoping they'd show her his last movements or reveal who he'd been in contact with. But the records showed nothing past September 30th. No calls. No data use. Nothing. 2 full days went by with no leads, and Alicia refused to sit still. She rallied friends into an informal search party and started combing the neighborhood block by block, looking for anything out of place. On October 7th, more than a week after Omar disappeared, that search finally produced something concrete. One of Alicia's friends spotted Omar's car parked just a couple of blocks from where he'd been living. When Alicia arrived, she found all of his belongings still inside: laptop, guitar, clothes, exactly the kind of valuables nobody would leave in an unlocked car in that part of town. It made no sense. If Omar had chosen to leave on his own, why would he abandon a car full of his own possessions just steps from his front door? To Alicia, this was proof that something was deeply wrong, and this time, when she called 911, the tone from law enforcement finally shifted. An abandoned vehicle stuffed with valuables was the kind of red flag that couldn't be waved away as a grown man simply choosing to vanish. With officers finally willing to act, Alicia pushed them to check Omar's actual residence. The property was only a few blocks from where the car had been sitting. When police arrived, Timothy Cook answered the door again, this time telling responding officers he hadn't seen Omar in nearly a week. He was cooperative, even friendly, and led them around back to what he said was Omar's living space, a small converted unit behind the main house. But what officers found inside didn't look like a bedroom that someone had simply packed up and left. It looked gutted. Drywall was torn out. Flooring had been ripped up. There was debris scattered everywhere, and strangely, what looked like standing water pooled on part of the floor. There was nothing left to suggest Omar had ever lived there at all. No furniture, no personal items, nothing. Without a warrant, there was only so far police could go, and they were forced to leave the property without the answers they needed. Alicia wasn't finished. She went back through everything recovered from Omar's car and found 2 receipts, one from a nearby pharmacy and one from a fast food spot. Both dated the night he disappeared. She brought them straight to the detectives working the case and told them exactly what she thought this could unlock: surveillance footage from both locations that might show Omar's final movements. It worked. Investigators pulled the footage and pieced together his last known hours. He looked completely normal in both videos, calm, unbothered, going through an ordinary errand run with no sign that anyone was following him or that anything was wrong. His final stop was just around the corner from where he lived. After that, nothing. No more purchases. No more phone activity. No more bank transactions. Omar had simply gone silent, and his car, found blocks from his front door, was missing only one thing: his phone. While Alicia continued pressing for answers on land, investigators out on the water were working an entirely separate case that no one yet realized was connected. The barrel pulled from San Diego Bay had been sent to the medical examiner's office, but the ocean had already done significant damage. Decomposition and exposure to salt water had destroyed much of the physical evidence that might have identified the victim quickly. What remained undeniable, though, were the injuries. Investigators counted roughly 60 stab wounds concentrated across the face, neck, and back, the kind of violence that speaks to intense rage rather than a struggle gone wrong. Whoever did this wanted the body gone permanently, weighted down and dumped where they assumed it would never resurface. The one detail that changed everything was small: a tattoo on the victim's ankle. As investigators cross-referenced open missing persons cases from the surrounding area, they began contacting families with basic questions about identifying marks. When that call reached Alicia, she confirmed what she had been dreading. Her brother had that exact tattoo in that exact place. The case was reclassified immediately. This was no longer a missing persons file. It was a homicide, and the victim was Omar Medina. For Alicia and her mother, this news didn't bring closure. It broke them open in a completely different way. All the effort Alicia had put into finding her brother alive now had to be redirected toward finding whoever had taken his life. And she wasn't going to let up now, not when they were finally this close. Detectives shifted their full attention to figuring out exactly how that barrel ended up floating in the bay. They started with the marina surveillance system operated by the Port of San Diego, reviewing hours of recorded footage from the days surrounding the discovery. Eventually, they found something worth pulling apart frame by frame: a pickup truck backing a small boat down to the water's edge at the Chula Vista Marina. The boat itself stood out immediately to anyone who understood the area. It was a freshwater fishing boat, completely wrong for open ocean water. Whoever launched it that day either didn't know or didn't care that it wasn't built for the bay. The footage showed the boat heading out past the jetty and eventually disappearing from camera range, but it returned less than an hour later, far too quick for any real fishing trip. What caught investigators' attention wasn't just the timing. It was how differently the boat sat in the water when it came back. It rode noticeably higher, a strong indication that something heavy had been on board during the trip out and was no longer there on the return. Two figures were visible in the recordings, one aboard the boat, another standing near the truck, but the image quality wasn't sharp enough to make out faces or identifying features. Still, this truck and boat combination had become the clearest lead investigators had. From there, detectives widened their search, pulling footage from every business within a several-mile radius of the marina, tracing the most plausible routes the truck could have taken. Eventually, they picked it back up on a gas station security camera further down the highway, and this time the image was clear enough to actually work with. A man got out of the truck wearing shorts, a maroon shirt, and a green cap, walked into the store, and made a small purchase at the register. As investigators studied the footage more closely, they noticed something on the back of his leg, a tattoo. It looked familiar. 2 weeks earlier, officers wearing body cameras had walked through Omar's residence with his landlord, Timothy Cook, and in that footage, Cook's leg tattoo was clearly visible. Same design, same placement. It was the same man captured at the gas station. It's a kind of detail that sounds almost too convenient for a true crime story. A distinctive tattoo linking a suspect across two completely separate pieces of footage weeks apart. But that's exactly how a lot of real investigations break open. Killers rarely think about the small, permanent things on their own bodies that a camera might catch. Cook could scrub bleach into every corner of that converted unit, tear out flooring, rip down drywall, and none of it mattered once his own leg gave him away on a gas station security tape. In an instant, the man who had told Alicia and the police twice that he hadn't seen Omar in days became the primary suspect in a homicide investigation. Detectives placed him under close surveillance, watching his home and tracking his movements for anything that might tie him directly to Omar's death. It didn't take long. Officers watched Cook loading trash bags into his car outside his home, and once he pulled away from the property, they made the decision to stop his vehicle and search it. Inside, they found wet rags, mismatched clothing, and an unmistakable smell of bleach clinging to everything. Police impounded the vehicle's contents as evidence and located the green pickup truck seen at the marina, sending it in for forensic analysis. As detectives dug into Cook's background and his computer records, a financial motive started to surface. He had access to Omar's banking information, his social security number, and other sensitive personal data, more than a landlord would ever need. And when investigators pulled his criminal history, they found something that reframed the entire case. Cook had served 17 years in state prison for attempted murder, released only a short time before Omar moved into that property. Piece by piece, detectives reconstructed what had actually happened on the night of September 30th. Omar came home that evening, and inside that small converted unit behind the main house, Cook confronted him with a knife. What followed was a brutal, sustained attack, more than 60 stab wounds inflicted on a man who had done nothing but rent a room from the wrong person. To erase any trace of what he'd done, Cook tore the space apart, stripped out flooring and drywall, and scrubbed the scene with bleach, the same smell later found soaked into the rags in his car. It nearly worked. If Alicia hadn't pushed as hard as she did, if she hadn't handed detectives those receipts, if she hadn't insisted officers check the property in the first place, this might have stayed an unsolved disappearance indefinitely. The next morning, Cook enlisted a friend, the second man seen in the marina footage, to help him dispose of the body. Together they loaded Omar into a barrel, drove it to the marina, launched it out into the bay on a boat that was never built for those waters, and dumped it, weighted down with cinder blocks meant to keep it on the ocean floor forever. Bank records later showed Cook made a deposit into his own account from a nearby ATM that same evening, one more piece connecting him directly to Omar's death. When Alicia got the call that an arrest had been made and that it was Timothy Cook, she says she broke down completely, months of fear and exhaustion finally giving way. At sentencing, she stood before the court not just as a witness, but as Omar's sister, describing what it meant to lose him and what it took to explain that loss to her own children. She has spoken about how she expected the grief to turn into bitterness, but instead found herself holding onto the same encouragement Omar always gave her, to keep going, to keep believing things would be okay, even when it felt impossible. Timothy Cook was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 56 years to life in state prison. For Alicia and her family, it wasn't a moment that erased the loss, but it was accountability, the kind that almost never came, because the system initially told her there wasn't enough evidence to even look. Her brother's case stands as a reminder of exactly how much can slip through the cracks when a missing adult is written off too early, and how much difference one relentless family member can make when everyone else has already moved on. Omar Medina's life was cut short by someone he trusted enough to live under the same roof with, but his story didn't end in silence, because his sister refused to let it. What makes this case stick with people isn't just the brutality of it. It's how close the truth came to never surfacing at all. If Alicia had accepted the first answer she was given, if she had let the missing persons policy be the final word, Omar's disappearance might have stayed an open question forever. A name on a cold case list with no leads and no urgency behind it. Instead, she treated every dead end as a starting point. She turned an abandoned car into evidence, turned 2 forgotten receipts into a surveillance trail, and turned a system that told her to wait into one that had no choice but to act. That kind of persistence doesn't undo the loss, but it's the reason Timothy Cook is behind bars instead of walking free. And it's the reason Omar's name is remembered as more than just another unsolved disappearance. For Alicia, the fight for justice was never about proving a point to the police who doubted her. It was about her brother, about making sure the last chapter of his story wasn't written by the person who took his life. Every family who has ever been told to wait and see, who has ever felt dismissed while searching for someone they love, can look at this case and see what it took to finally be believed. It shouldn't take a sister combing through trash-strewn rooms and pulling security footage herself to get an investigation moving. But in Omar's case, that's exactly what it took, and it worked.